Welcome to Unleash Your Inspired Voice, the podcast that focuses on developing a more conscious-minded, heart-centered approach to life and business. And now here to introduce today's special guest is the host of Unleash Your Inspired Voice, author, content strategist, and Unity Consciousness activist, Peter Clark Nelson.
Hi, my name is Peter Clark Nelson, your host for Unleash Your Inspired Voice. Our guest for today's show is Erica Glessing. Erica is a best-selling author, podcast producer, third-generation publisher, game-changing inspiration maven, and mom to 3 teens. She believes that when you tell your story, you change the world, and she certainly walks her talk. Known as the podcast maven and a #1 international best-selling author, she is the founder of Happy Publishing, which has published over 250 international best-selling authors. Erica's latest book is a full-color inspirational book of happiness quotations featuring the photographs of Rich Cruz. Happiness Quotations is scheduled for release on May 20th, 2018. Erica not only helps create and market podcasts for her clients, but her own 8-minute daily podcast, The Erica Glessing Show, has received more than 250,000 downloads. In a recent article, Erica says, "I built the show to inspire my friends, authors, and lightworkers around the world." She then asked, "In 8 minutes, could you shift your energy so that each day brings more joy?" If 8 minutes with Erica on her podcast can shift the energy of her listeners to joy, imagine what the next 45 minutes will do for your overall sense of joy. With that in mind, get ready to shift into a joyous state of being as Erica and I discuss how to follow the energy of your message. Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Peter Clark Nelson, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Unleash Your Inspired Voice podcast. This is the show that teaches you how to scale your consciousness while scaling your business. And as you heard in the intro, our guest today is Erica Glessing. Erica, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me on your show. It's very exciting to be at the beginning of something big.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to have you on here. And for those people who are listening to this podcast and watching this video, I actually was just interviewed on Erica's podcast. So you'll be able to learn more about her podcast and what she's doing and links to go listen to that. So, Erica, nobody knows your inspired message and the work you do as well as you do. So share with us your inspired message and how you work with subject matter experts and heart-centered, conscious-minded entrepreneurs in getting their message out to their audience.
So I've been doing this kind of work for a very long time. So I started out, as you are aware, as a news reporter. And then I would write stories of people like children. Or I would write stories. I'd find stories of people that were kind of hidden. And I would interview people and I'd put their stories in the media. So I think that gave me kind of a nice background. And that was starting in 1980 something professionally. And I recognized at one point I've probably done over 15 to 20,000 interviews in my lifetime. And so, it's just something that I really like doing when I'm working with people, is to help them. Sometimes I see it in their throat chakras. Sometimes it's in my family's going to criticize me if I tell my truth, which might not make them look great. Sometimes I see it can be multiple lifetimes where maybe you were killed or shot for expressing yourself. I have one client, she was jokingly talking about something that happened when she was 12. She grew up in Greece, and her dad said, "You can't write about that. You might get killed." And it was kind of like that energy of kind of like China, when there was times when the writers got killed for expressing their voices. And I said, well, maybe he was right. And maybe you would have got killed if you'd expressed your voice. I mean, we don't know. So what can we do now, since you can write about things and not get killed? But, so I don't do the same thing with each person, but I do work with people, mostly authors and podcast hosts, to create bigger than they are now.
That's beautiful. And I love the way that you were talking about your the early part of your career as a journalist, how you were essentially shining a light on people and circumstances that may not have otherwise been heard or seen. And I think that's where I was really intrigued by the work that you do in the present day, of course, with the subject matter experts that you bring into your book publishing projects. And of course, now where there's a strong focus on allowing people to create a platform that they can share their inspired voice and be empowered by. And as you said, with your example, with your client, yeah, we do live in a day and age now, at least in most countries, where we can speak our truth and not have to worry about being jailed or killed as a result of it. But the truth of that is that in the past, the not so distant past, that wasn't always the case.
Absolutely.
So that sort of conditioning and that fear and that level of scarcity and shame, it permeates through the collective consciousness, as you know. And one of the things I would love for you to talk about for just a little bit before we jump into some of the other areas of the podcast and what you do with your clients and how they get their message out through this kind of a platform. But in your experience, when you begin working with subject matter experts, it could be a book, it could be launching a podcast, whatever it might be. What have you found to be some consistencies with things that are holding them back from fully unleashing their inspired voice and that you actually end up helping them work through?
I think you saw the picture. I was speaking to a group of 8th graders recently.
Yeah.
And we have to give ourselves permission to do things badly.
Great point.
So if we're sitting there poised with our pen and we're either going to write or we're going to do a video or we're going to do a Facebook Live or we're going to do a tweet or we're going to do, right, there's like 80,000 ways we can say who we are right now. And then we freeze and we put all the criticisms that might show up and they jump into our heads. And here's the hard part. It's just like the example of someone who spoke their truth and got killed. There's some validity. They might get criticized when they speak their truth. I have a whole bunch of things that I like to talk about that if I say them out loud in a public way, I'm sure I'll be slammed right and left. And so the thing is, usually there's some validity that they'll be criticized. And so that freezes people so much. And so there's first of all, not being perfect. Second of all, being willing to do it badly and just being willing to be judged. Allow the judgment to fuel you. So I say, allow the judgment to fuel you. So I make it sound so easy. Go do a book. Publish a book. I've published over 250 authors. It is easy. When you're not slamming yourself the whole time, you can't write and edit at the exact same time. It's different parts of our brain. So I say, do the creation and then come in with a different part and do the refining, the perfecting, the sound engineering, the massaging, the playing with it, the asking it to be better. It's okay to seek perfection, of course, and seek excellence. However, if it's stopping you so much, then you have to look at what is the reward of not being able to speak. And if you have too many rewards, I'm not going to get in trouble. My husband won't leave me. My kids aren't going to get mad at me. I'm not going to lose my job. If you have too many rewards for not speaking, your voice might die stuck in there. And so you want to start looking at, how could I reward myself for speaking my truth? And you might start with a journal that's locked. Or you might start with something you create on your hard drive. And you commit to not sending it to anyone. I think there are books that should stay on hard drives. It's okay. Once you know it's okay, that your book can be on your hard drive for 10 years, it's okay. I just published someone, she wrote the most beautiful book in the world. It's called Trust the Process, and it's about a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. And she has a butterfly garden, and she photographed butterflies, and they're so beautiful. And you watch these caterpillars, she has every stage. It sat on her hard drive for 8 years. Wow. It came out this year, I think last year. One of the most beautiful books I've ever published. And it came out when it was ready. And if it had stayed on her hard drive, honestly, Well, to me, that'd be very sad, but it would still be okay.
I think that's beautiful what you're talking about, because there's a process, as you and I both know, and people that we've worked with are aware of. There's a creative process that needs to be allowed to happen. And I say needs to be because so often we get in the way of that creative flow. And a lot of the things that do get in the way isn't from a technical standpoint. It's not about how well written your prose is. It's not how clear and succinct you can communicate if you're doing a podcast or a public presentation. What's getting in the way is the unseen. It's the unrepressed, unhealed traumas. Somebody may have said something so subtle as a child to you, and questioned the way you look at school when you showed up, and somehow that manifested and blossomed into an innate fear to be seen. And maybe your family, maybe somebody in your family close to you said something or did something that kept you from fully speaking your truth. So again, there's all sorts of ways that can interrupt the beauty of one's message. And I love how you talked about that it's okay to simply say, this book that I've written is just going to stay on my hard drive. In my experience, I found that when people do get to that point of acceptance, at some point, that book, that message, it's going to come out. And as you pointed out beautifully with your client, it comes out at the most opportune time, when it's ready and when the author is ready. So talk a little bit about this process when people are ready to transition to the next level of expressing their message. So for example, you've worked with authors, over 250 of them, and have produced and helped, put together and published some incredible books. But now we're in a day and age where podcasting and other means of communicating one's message is opening up on unheard of levels. So if somebody has a book, there's a good chance they should be getting interviewed on a podcast, or at the very least, perhaps even thinking of starting their own podcast. So share a little bit about this transition that you've experienced, first of all, for yourself, because you've got a very successful podcast. And then how has the transition been working for some of the people that you have collaborated with, when you're getting them and guiding them into this new platform, which for many people is just completely new?
Well, I'm going to say something just like flat out business-ish. And I had breakfast this morning with someone. I was like, the power is the drip.
Mm.
And this behavior that has blossomed in our culture of Netflix binge watching and listening. And so the behavior now exists. People go and they find a show and they love it and they watch the whole season. And then they watch the season before that, and then they watch the season before that. So you see an upside down pyramid where someone listens to this episode. Then you notice this one has more listens. And then the one below that has even more listens. And then the one below that has even more listens. Because as people come in and they hear the first show, they keep going down and listening to more shows. And so we see this interesting behavior that has just erupted in our culture very recently. So if you're willing to be heard, I like the podcast. I do like the audio. I've always loved music. I've always wanted to produce musicians when I was in high school. My goal was to be a manager of a band, like when I was a kid. Like, so I've always loved helping people express their voice. In fact, my job in college was I worked for arts and lectures, and I would pick up the musicians, like at the airport. I'd greet them, get them into the limo, take them to the show, and they'd violin, get to meet them and hang out with them. I'd take their little posters, I'd walk them around Davis. And my job was promoting artists. And it was just something that I did for a school job, you know? So even in the core of that was an indicator of me liking to help people express themselves. And the power of the audio, I was just talking to someone this morning who he has a loan business. And I said, well, what if you did 2 minutes per day of tip? 6 months from now, someone goes in, binge listens, They're trying to get a loan. They hear one thing. You used to be an appraiser. You're so brilliant. You really get this stuff. So now they've listened to 3 hours of you. Do they want to call a different lender at that point? I mean, if they vibe with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, once they get a chance to experience that level of expertise in the manner by which they can now with podcasts, there really is no other choice. At that point, they've invested their time and energy. So they're going to naturally invest their money and more time into having somebody that they've already garnered some very good insight from. I think that's a brilliant tip that you gave them.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating to me. I'm quite interested in it. And there's something also in consciousness, and I kind of call it a voice print, which is like a thumbprint. And our voice carries some of us. And I was reading a poem on a Facebook Live, and it was by Ntozake Shange, one of my favorite poets of all time. And it's For Colored Girls Who Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. And I just opened the book, and I let it take me to a poem. And I sort of asked to be shown which poem would help the most people at that moment in time. And I read a poem, and one of my friends said it changed her whole thing, like when she heard it. She'd never heard the poem. It's a famous poem from that body of work. And me reading it gave it something. And it was about kind of like, I will no longer put up with you if you screw me over. He said it like that was kind of the message. And I mean, in much nicer ways, because it's done by a very famous poet. And so I read it, and she was one of the poets that shaped my life. And so I was so grateful for that poet. I read this poem that changed my life. Something in my reading of it, though, made it accessible to someone who couldn't hear it before I read it. It was something in my voice print that was completely different from your voice print, or if you read it, or someone else read it. So there's something innate when you're making a podcast that even if you're talking about a topic like vulnerability, it's a very common topic now, right? Very, not common, but much more mainstream. Forgiveness. You take a big topic like that. But it's your voice print. It's different than anyone else doing it, and it's amazing. So I think for me, it's just taking off. It's a really fun place to be. It's a fun place to create in.
I'm glad. Well, first of all, I'm very glad that you brought up those examples and referenced the voice print. And I often refer to that as the energetic signature. So each human being has their own energetic signature from their essence and presence. Much like you said, a thumbprint is unique to each of us. So we have an energetic signature, but that signature, that imprint, that comes out through our unique and distinct sound of our voice. Same thing with our writing. So there's ways, and your message becomes its own essence. It has its own unique energetic signature. Same thing with an audience. And one of the things that I really enjoyed having a conversation with you on before we did this podcast, which I want to convey to the audience listening and watching this. So for 20 years, I've been working with people on identifying their energetic signature and how to bring that out and enhance it within their message. And while I know that, there are things that I oftentimes just, I'm getting involved in, the nuances of the work I'm doing, and I tend to forget that in areas that I probably should have remembered. And you, Erica, brought something up about my podcast. You identified its energy, its energetic signature, and you said, for me to be aware of what the podcast is communicating. And when you said that, I was like, well, of course. And so the minute you said that, it allowed a much more intimate and awareness for me to have with the energy of the podcast that really is in its infancy. So I want to thank you for that. And I feel like that's a very important subject I want to have us build on in terms of a conversation for just a moment, because in my experience of working with a lot of people on their books and their content and also delivering workshops and presentations, I've noticed that when it comes to writing, a lot of people will say, I have an idea, but there's already been way too many books written on the same subject. Or I want to go deliver presentations and workshops, but there's so many people already doing a workshop on that subject, like say, for example, vulnerability or forgiveness, which has been, discussed by a lot of people. However, when we as individuals bring our unique experience, infuse it with our passion, and weave in our energetic signature, whatever subject that we're sharing with the world takes on an entirely new form of energy, which, to your point, when you read that poem, it profoundly changed a person's life. So oftentimes it's not so much just the content or the subject. Now, granted, you might need to weave in a little bit of a uniqueness to it if you want to capture someone's attention. So I want you to talk a little bit about that and what you have found, if there's any differences at all between people who are struggling to get their book out as opposed to some of the things that they might be struggling with on a podcast, because in a podcast, they're being seen if they do a video, and they're definitely being heard. Whereas with the book, they can sort of hide their physical presence, and they can certainly hide the sound and tone of their voice, but they can't hide the energy of their words. So talk a little bit about some of the differences between writing a book and doing a podcast, and where you've seen some challenges people have with the two mediums.
Okay. So for the question, it is, well, the thing that you actually said earlier about what to do if you think your message isn't unique enough, or what to do, that one was one I wanted to respond to.
Oh,
Is that
absolutely.
okay?
Oh, by all means,
Okay.
let's dive into that.
Because when you brought that up, I really, I did this thing called the Happiness Telesummit for a few years,
Mm-hmm.
and I started vibing into what the audience was asking. Like I could sort of telepathically connect with the audience. So as I was listening to your audience, as you were talking about that in the future, because I'm crazy psychic, so I was seeing the listeners of your podcast really getting kind of lit up around, I want to write about this, but other people have. I'm very curious about this topic, but it's been done. That really was like, I could feel this sort of chord being struck like a gong. And so first of all, I just like to ask everyone to bring some energy into that and expand your energy out. So I'm just going to ask everyone listening right now to just expand your energy out to the galaxies. Go ahead and expand your energy out. And as we get connected to our source energy, there's a bigness, and there are messages that come to you to teach uniquely. And it really doesn't matter who else teaches it. What if a first grade teacher said, I can't teach you how to do 2 times 3. There's 72,000 first grade teachers. I just can't teach that. There's teachers everywhere that know how to teach that. You can't do that, right? So if your body, when you hear something, makes you want to teach it, like, oh my gosh, if I don't teach, one of the books I did is The Energy of Healing. Oh, such a great topic. It's so fascinating. And I did another book, and it was about dragons. And it was all, this is her cards, but she did a book, and she did these dragon pots, and I just have to show them, And it was like, well, other people have done things with dragons, so I probably shouldn't. Well, her dragons were not having that. The moon dragon, look at that dragon. Oh my gosh.
That's
So
awesome.
if you're getting something and it's a message and you're being shown, and you want to, and when you think of that message, your whole body goes, I want to wake up. I want to teach that message. That's coming from a bigger place than you. And so you have choices once you start getting these messages. And often what happens is you get the message. There's a book on right now with an author, and she got messages from spirit of people who had committed suicide. So it's messages from beings on the other side. She's a psychic medium. And she happens to get a lot of messages from, maybe parents of a child who'd committed suicide, and the kid's spirit would talk to her. So her whole book is messages. And what's fascinating that she found out when she was interviewing all these spirits was how different each suicide was. And so while people get in judgment about suicide, what she found out was each case was different. Like each case had its own entity to it. And there was no like the judgments in our society about how wrong it is or something. Like all that kind of shifted for her when she tuned into each different spirit and each different situation. And it wasn't all the same at all. And each, it was so crazy. So her story, and for a while she was just like, why me? Why am I getting these messages? Right? So you have choices when you get messages. You know, you don't have to act on every single message. You don't have to write books on every topic. You don't have to do any of it. You could get the messages and not act on them. However, if you find something that lights you up so much, and then you choose to follow it through with a podcast or a book or a radio show or a TV show or a Facebook Live, I mean, there's really no wrongs. See what lights you up. See what turns you up. When we're turned up and we're turned on, we're going to help more people. It's just, you can't not. You can't wake up and be excited and turned on and talk to people about something and not help someone. Even if you help the guy at the donut store who likes seeing your shining eyes at that morning because you're so excited you're getting your kids bagels. It's like, wow, right? You know, he's happy that you smiled at him. So you've just helped someone by your smiling because you're excited and turned on. And so as we keep tuning that in and tuning that up, turning it up and turning it up, and then letting the judgment just go, oh, that's such an interesting judgment. And then I like to let it fuel me.
As well, you should. Yeah, I mean, when these judgments come up, there's power to them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I have to say, Peter, I don't really see that big of a differential. If you're in creation, I don't know. I think where you look at for choosing your medium is what you resonate with.
yes.
And so if you love, I love listening to things. I like MP3 recordings. So I will often have something on if I want to change something. I'll go and I'll find a nice MP3 recording to help me through something. So for me, and I love books, but I've kind of, I don't know if it's what's shifted for me, but now I really love learning. I'd rather even have, rather than go to a workshop now, I'd almost rather hear the workshop. And then it does something when I'm in my private space and I'm listening to the workshop. I'm listening to the changes that happened in that workshop. It does something for me that helps me learn. I can't explain it. So even more so than reading a book for me when I'm listening, it does something for me personally. So for me, the next medium step makes sense that it's with that audio for teaching, for creating audios to help people learn, because that's something that works for me. And I think for your listeners, it's an and universe. You can have a book and a podcast.
I love how you said that. It's an and universe. And for everybody that's listening to this podcast right now or is watching the video as well, I invite you to go back and re-listen to a lot of the things that Eric is talking about, because there is so much wealth of experience and love that's infused into the things she's saying. Very practical as well. And I can speak from my own personal experience. I've been wanting to do a podcast for over a year. So 12 years ago, I used to do a regular series of teleseminars where I would interview people. And that was before podcasts and social media really became what it was. And, my journey went into a different direction. And here I am full circle. And I'm giving this example because just up to the point where I was about ready to start the interview process for this new podcast, I was looking at all the different platforms that are out there, right? So I ended up choosing Spreaker. So Spreaker provided a really nice platform. There's a lot of really good ones out there. But the one thing I was reminded of is that there are hundreds and thousands of podcasts. And I guarantee you that by the time this podcast Unleash Your Inspired Voice is a year old. There will probably be 1 million to 2 million plus podcasts. And I will just tell you from my own experience, when I started to get the sense of the breadth and depth of how many podcasts, I was like, holy shit, I'm starting a podcast amidst all of this. Like, all of a sudden, I felt this anxiety come in. I felt this fear, like, forget it. It's not worth it. But that's when I had to remind myself, it doesn't matter whether there is 100,000, 100 million, or none. If you have an inspired message, as Erica was saying, if you have something that moves you, you can rest assured that it's going to move someone else. And you can also bank on the fact that whatever it is you're out there to express and to share is going to have a profound impact on people. And if you don't share that, think about how many lives are not going to be affected by that message. And to really bring that back home even closer is I want people to think about this. How many individuals have you been inspired by? How many books have you listened to? How many podcasts, how many audio programs have inspired you? Like Erica was just saying, when she needs to work through something or needs to be inspired, she listens. What is she listening to? Imagine if the things she was listening to, the music, the seminars, the programs, what if they were never done? So this is something where, for me, I had to go through that process, and I know a lot of people go through it as well, and sometimes you just have to say, fuck it, I'm all in. Go all in. And you know what? We live in a day and age now where people like Erica are available for actually walking you through this. 5-10 years ago, where the hell were you going to find somebody like that? It's going to be very difficult, right? So this is the thing that I want to impart upon people in listening to this podcast is that when you hear somebody like Erica, who's been literally been in the media her whole life, she was raised by two people who were in the media and television. She's a journalist doing thousands of interviews. And here she is segueing into this medium. What does that tell you? Well, it tells me that this is not just viable. This is the present day, and it's going to grow. So I want you to talk real quickly, Erica, about this idea. You said earlier that the world is at a place now where it's been conditioned to binge these types of programs, where it's no longer about just, even going to a live event. Like, you can have online summits and online events. What have you found is actually the shift in that, and how, like, your clients have been able to take advantage of it by launching their podcasts?
Well, you know what, when you said that, I don't know why, but I got the picture in my head of the author like John Grisham or Dick Francis, Rita Mae Brown. These are I like mysteries for my spare time, fun time, going to the library time. Mm-hmm. So I love it when there's like 18 books by the same person. It's like, because the worst thing in the world is to fall in love with an author and you only get one book.
Yeah.
And you're just like, you go to the library, you look at the shelf, and there's the book. And you go online, you find this one book, and it was so good, and you're just like, oh. So for me, I think it dates back to that whole thing. Maybe you like an actor. Do you go to, they call them butts in seats actors. They're actors who can put butts in seats, and there's not that many of them. And that's why, like, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is like the most highest paid actor in the world right now, or he was last year, because he could put butts in seats. People would see his face and be like, I'm going to that movie, right? So it's like, will you be the butts in seats podcast voice?
That's a great tagline. Yeah.
So one of the things in our heart-centered entrepreneur world, right? Because we have that in common. Mm-hmm. We help people who are heart-centered and consciousness-focused and really into expansion and really want to change the world and want to take their messages and help people with them. And there's this thing that happened in network marketing, or not network marketing, like online marketing, where they said you needed to niche. You needed to get focused. You needed to, and that felt to people very contractive, because maybe every 6 months they want to teach something different. Maybe they want to teach about perfectionism one year, and then maybe the next year this year the big thing is failure, how you can fail and how it's okay and what that teaches you. And that's the big topic right now. So what we see is these ideas come in from source. And so in expansion, we let ourselves have that voice come in. And when you allow the voice to come in without so much beating it up for coming in, when you let it come in a little more easily, and you let the voices come in a little more easily, and you let yourself, I mean, I know that some people got very lit up when I decided to focus so much on podcasts because they wanted to keep me in my book publishing CEO role. And they were very happy with me there because they knew they could send book people to me, and it was so comfortable. When my whole platform said books, it was like so safe. They knew if they called me, and you do books, right? You do books full time, right? Well, no, right now I'm doing podcasts more, but I still, of course, I'm not going to lose 3 generations of publishing information. My dad is a publisher, my grandfather was a publisher. I'm not gonna, that's not going to leave, right? Because I'm interested in podcasts now. I'm not going to stop knowing what I know. So I find that when we give ourselves permission to follow the energy, follow the energy, follow the energy. What's fun? What's light? What's easy? What's graceful? What makes us wake up and be joyful? And if it's, the other thing that I find with my podcast is it doesn't have to be perfect. When you're doing 8 minutes a day, it sure is not going to be perfect. There's going to be things you're not going to like about almost every single interview. You're going to say, why didn't I ask this while I had that rock? I had John Lee Dumas on my show. Why didn't he's the best, entrepreneur podcaster on the planet? Why did I ask him this? Like you can second guess anything. And what I do is I just go, well, I'm doing another 5 interviews next week. What can I do with them? And then the week after that, I'm going to have some other ideas, and those get to go on the podcast. And then it's such a nice little playground because then every day, and then what people get to know is you. And so I might really do well with authors who have lots of different ideas all the time and have too many stories and too many books to write and too much coming in. That might be a good place for me to help people like that because they're creating too much all the time and they don't know how to recognize on their own the life force of each one. And one of my clients, that we were talking about it, and it was like, I was joking, she's having 17 babies because she has all these creations she wants to make. And you can't have 17 babies in one womb, right, at one time, all coming out, unless you're like a dog, or a pig. You could have them if you were a pig. But most human beings need to work on one thing and then work on something else and work on something else. And so I said, you're going to have to let one of them be dominant in order to birth it. And then you can let something else come in. And that can be dominant. And then you can birth it. So I just look at like the medium of podcasting as being something that I think it is like Amazon did to books, what iTunes is doing for radio shows. They're becoming, radio shows are becoming podcasts. Super Soul Sunday turned itself into a podcast. Now, all this means is they took the sound recording and gave it to iTunes. And it gave them an entirely new audience. Is that interesting? So interesting. So I don't really have an answer to what's going to happen in the future. I'm not quite that futuristic, but I definitely enjoy taking advantage of things that will help change the planet,
I love that. It's one of the things that just really inspired me about the work that you're doing. And our dear friend Katrina Elkins introduced us, and Katrina was one of the guests on the podcast. So for those of you who have not listened to Katrina's podcast, go find that.
Yes.
And
so good.
I want to wrap things up by asking you, okay, so at this point, a lot of people listening to this may already have a podcast. They may have been thinking about it. Some people may not even had that on their radar. And now all of a sudden they're saying to themselves, I think I want to do this. So what are some suggestions and best practices that you would impart upon people who are looking to start a podcast for the first time?
Yeah, I definitely, thank you so much for that question. I really appreciate it because I love helping people with their podcasts, as you know. I think really to look at a vision of where it could be in a year, what could happen in a year, what could come out of it. You want to not just help others, you want to allow it to help you. We talk to the creations in my classes, we talk to the creations, and we not only build them to help others, we allow them to also nourish us. And then we look at what could even be more, because you can't really vision it perfectly because it's going to be more than you thought. It could help more people than you thought. It could do different things than you thought. So you're not visioning it in order to put it into a tiny box. You're visioning it to give it space, and then you want to let it change you, and then you want to have it help people change, and then you bring that energy of those people that get changed from it in, and you want to turn some of that into money for you. So you want to look at monetizing, because when it makes money, it will smell successful. It's a different smell. Poverty smells a little different, right? And so if the podcast is helping you make money, and you sometimes have to show it what that means. So it might mean on your podcast you talk about a workshop, and the workshop costs money, so that you have different steps up that people can start paying for things to work with you on deeper transformational things. So when someone gives you a exchange of dollars for your wisdom, it's going to help them change more. It's the money they need to give you to get the transformation they're asking for. So I have one client, and she's working on a podcast. It's really beautiful. It'll actually be coming out right about when this is airing. And we're looking at all the pipelines that she has to have money come in from the way she wants to help. And we're just looking at what different pipelines can she build, so that it doesn't have to be hard, right? So we look at what could be fun, and then we do some calls to action in the podcast. So I would say, to even from the very beginning, ask the podcast to make you money. Look at how you can if you're interested in like the heart-centered healing work, how can you help people with it, even in a bigger way than you've thought? And then, is it fun? Because things that are fun for you are going to get done a lot easier than if they aren't very fun. You're going to find yourself dreading it and the energy. Have you ever gotten an email from someone who hated sending it to you? Hate to bring this up. Notice you haven't met this. Can you send me that? There's all this. Bleh. So you want to have your podcast really have clear energy, have a vision, get clear on what it can do for your business, get clear on what you want to help people transform, get clear on if you have a book coming out, get it into alignment with the messages of the book, get it into alignment with your other projects, and then you keep staying in this alignment with it. That's kind of a good, I'm not going to talk about the actual math of it, it's not that complicated, but there are a lot of mistakes you can make. And one of the biggest ones is maybe not having a plan.
Absolutely true. If you don't have the plan, then you're going to find yourself lost in the process, because there's, you said podcasts are simple. There's some very simple things you can do. But from my own personal experience, there is a series of intricate pieces that need to be thought through. And I can tell you that one of the things that's been very helpful for me and the people that I've been bringing on to work with me on getting this out there, and it's growing. This is in its infancy. The way this podcast looks right now will not be the way it's going to look in 8 months, 12 months from now. So there's a vision I have for this to be scaled up. And yet I had to accept the reality that where I'm starting is okay. I'm good with that. But to be able to articulate that to other people, I needed to make sure I had exactly how the segments were going to go, what I needed for an intro, the outro, the kinds of people that I wanted to bring onto the show, the vision for it. And as you said, and I'm so glad you said this, it's got to be fun. You've got to be enthusiastic about it. This is not a chore, okay? This is... Well, it takes time and effort, but you got to have fun with the process.
Yeah, not every moment of every day is sunshine. There's days when my Wi-Fi was down, and that's when I found out I could air a show later and predate it, because my Wi-Fi was down for a little while, and it made it really interesting. So I think you're going to be on a learning curve with your podcast, but it's really fun learning, and you do learn and you do get better, and it is easier and easier. And once you get a couple iTunes rankings, and then I send that to people and I say, do you want to be on my show? And I send them where I was #1 for a couple of days, and it was like, oh my gosh, and as you step up into the potency of the medium, um, the other thing too is one of the ways it's different than a book is a book you tend to self-judge yourself on how many a book sells. You kind of it's really hard not to judge yourself on how many books a book sells. But a book is doing work in the world, like just me showing you this cover.
Mhm.
There's an energy to showing you this cover that with the DNA helix and all these beautiful people on it. I didn't show you them, but they're so gorgeous. And there's an energy in this book that even seeing the book has now just kind of, and this was from a couple years ago, but it's just kind of raised the vibration all around that book. Do you see?
Yeah, absolutely.
With a podcast, it's easier to recognize. You're not putting the weight of it needing to sell a copy every day. Like you're not putting that huge weight on it. Like a book, you put weight on sometimes. Like you can't, it's hard for people to be happy with their book sometimes. Have you noticed that?
Yes,
Like it's much easier for them to really get angry at their book or say that their book didn't achieve the expectations they set for it. And there's all these things. But with a podcast, what's so interesting for me is I don't have the expectation of it selling a certain number. I'm curious how many people will listen. I don't know. I couldn't believe when I hit 10,000 in my first month. I went, what on earth? Like, it so far surpassed my expectations. And I was just kind of in awe of it. And it was so much fun to have that awe. So probably like anything else, you want to look at what your expectations are. And then how can you have it work for you? And if you needed to have a certain amount of outside validation, then what are you going to do to get that in place? If you require 2,000 downloads in a certain number of times, what are you going to do to put that in place? How many people, how are you going to advertise it? How are you going to get it out there? If you don't require that much, for me, it was a vehicle partly so I could interview my authors so they could promote their work better. So it already did it just by having the show. Like it met my expectations by existing. Like my children. They exist. They've met my expectations. I get to have them in my life. So if your expectations are, you just want to look at all that stuff just like any other creation, and get into alignment with what works for you. And then if you need something different than what will happen, then you have to change what you do so that you get more. If you need a best-selling book, you got to do best-selling book work.
That's it. It really starts with the intention. Erica, I just want to say thank you first and foremost for not only just being on the show and imparting all of these years of wisdom and experience in the time that we've had, but also I just want to thank you for just shining your light on people that have an inspired message, because that's the key. So many people just need to be seen and acknowledged and be allowed to give themselves permission to share that message. And you do such a beautiful job of that. So for people that are wanting to go further with this and looking at not only perhaps maybe doing a book, but particularly launching their own podcast, where can they go to find out more information about you and how they can launch their inspired voice through a podcast?
What I would love people to do is to reach out and get on my show. So it's an 8-minute daily podcast and I get thousands of listens. So if they would like to come be a guest on my show, then go to the Erica Glessing Show and there's a guest button. And you can it's theericaglessingshow.com. And I really would just appreciate if people just want to be a guest on my show. And it's really fun. It's an 8-minute daily inspirational chat. It's for entrepreneurs. So if you're an entrepreneur, you qualify. And if you've listened to this show, you're now even more special to me. So you've listened to Peter and now you've listened to me. If you stayed this long, they stayed to the end, then I just want to say that you could come be interviewed on my show unless you're practicing hate or something, I don't do hate. I don't do hate or porn, but those are my only, I won't interview people about. So if you want to come on my show, that's a great way to meet me. And I'm available, theericaglessingshow.com. You can email me at myname@gmail.com. And you can find me at Erica Glessing everywhere on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. And just reach out, and I'm here. I do have a masterclass, which is a 50-minute video on getting started, and it's free. You can see it right on ericaglessing.com. You just click on it, and you can have the free 50 minutes of me talking about how to start your podcast.
That's fantastic. Well, I think there's a lot of different ways for people to obviously find you. Most importantly, I want to thank you for extending that invitation to people listening to this show and watching this to go and be interviewed. So for those of you who have an inspired voice, which I'm going to assume is 100% of the people listening to this program and watching this video, by all means, go to Erica's website and reach out to her and let her know you want to be interviewed. The world needs to hear your voice now more than ever, and Erica's got a fantastic platform for doing that. Erica, thank you again for being on the show, and I want to thank everybody for listening and for watching this video. I have no doubt that you got a wealth of information today. Now the question is, what are you going to go and do with it? And the first step is give yourself permission to unleash your inspired voice, because the world needs to hear and feel that now more than ever. And then from that point, go see Erica and get your voice heard through her podcast. Again, thank you for joining us on this episode, and I look forward to having you join me on the next episode of the Unleash Your Inspired Voice podcast. Have a beautiful and abundant day. To learn more about Erica Glessing, be sure to visit theericaglessingshow.com. You can also follow her on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. As you just heard, Erica is not only giving away a free 50-minute masterclass on how to start your podcast, she also wants to interview you on her podcast, The Erica Glessing Show. So if you have an inspired message you want to share with the world, visit theericaglessingshow.com and be sure to reach out to Erica to schedule your interview. Erica is also going to join me for an information-packed bonus video where we will talk about what is getting in the way of you monetizing your creations. If you've been wondering how to get out of a poverty mindset and allow your inspired message to expand financially, you don't want to miss this 25-minute bonus video. Go to unleashyourinspiredvoice.com and sign up for the bonus material. When you sign up, you will gain immediate access to the bonus video from Erica, and you will also continue to receive access to all bonus materials from our show's previous and upcoming guests. Thank you again for joining us on Unleash Your Inspired Voice.